Well, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. My name is Sandeep Sharma. I'll be moderating this session, Bears of Asia session today. We have 7 speakers in this session, and I'm pretty excited about this session because most of our speakers will be talking about bears in Asia, which is kind of a biodiversity hotspot for bears. If we are talking about them, we have species ranging from sloth bears, Asiatic black bears, sun bears. We have giant pandas in Asia. So the next 3 hours are going to be awesome. And without further delay, I would like to introduce our first speaker, Kahoko Tochigi. She's from Japan, and she'll be talking about, just give me a second. So Kahoko, she's PhD student at Laboratory of Forest Conservation Biology at Tokyo University of Agriculture and Technology. As I said, she's from Japan, and her study focus is on relationship between masting of accounts and Asian black bears feeding behavior, including vital rates leading to population dynamics. So today she'll be talking about temperature drives active patterns and habitat selection of Asian black bear. That's the title of her talk. And in a minute, I'll be playing her talk for all of you.
Hi everyone, I'm Kahoko Tochigi from Japan. Today, I'd like to talk about the changes of movement and behavior of Asian black bear as temperature changes. Recently, climate change around the world, especially global warming, affects animal species in many ways. It has been pointed out that clarifying how each animal species responds to changes in temperature is an important issue for conservation of animals. Mammals have homeostasis in response to environmental changes and thermoregulation in response to changes in temperature. For example, sweating to dissipate heat and shivering to generate heat and keep warm. Such thermoregulatory, so physiological adaptations require energy. So many mammals make behavioral adaptations to reduce their energy costs. Specifically, it is known that mammals avoid heat stress by staying in high elevation area or selecting vegetation with lower temperatures. Even if mammals avoid heat stress, selected habitat may be placed with low food resources for them because it is not place for first choice. Some species like brown bear choose habitat based on not only on temperature conditions, but also on the amount of food resources. However, little is known that actual activities of mammals in selected habitat when they avoid heat stress. Furthermore, since activity decreases with increasing temperature, it is possible that mammals are actually resting rather than foraging in such habitat. If mammals are not foraging, they could be low nutritional condition. Therefore, the goal of our study is to investigate change of activity pattern according to temperature in habitat selected by avoiding heat stress. This study focused on a large mammal, the Asian black bear, hereafter bear. It is a species that is generally sensitive to temperature change due to large body size. We firstly estimate habitat selection for 3 types of vegetation according to temperature. Secondly, we estimate the change of 3 activity patterns according to temperature and vegetation. We set 3 hypotheses. First, we hypothesized bears would not select low temperature habitat in relatively cool seasons like spring and autumn. Second, we hypothesized bears would select habitat with low temperature in summer by avoiding heat stress. Finally, we hypothesized bears would feed in substitute habitat at high temperature, but temperature become lower, bears feed in the high food availability habitat that has usually high temperature compared to other habitats. Our study area located in Ashio-Nikko Mountain of central Japan. Vegetation of this area is largely classified in grassland, conifer forest, and broad-leaved forest. We used location data for 70 bears captured from 2006 to 2012. We classified the activity patterns and habitat types of each location point. For classification of activity patterns, we conducted switching state space model that estimates their behavior in each location based on step length and angle parameters. After we classified the activity patterns into traveling or staying by SSSM, we classified staying category into feeding or resting on basis of activity sensor on GPS color. We also divided location data by 3 seasons and 4 daytimes because the activity of bears is known to be varied depending on season and the time of day. We applied conditional logistic models for habitat selection and multinomial logistic models for changes of activity pattern by temperature and habitat. As a result, bears' habitat selection is not affected by temperature and vegetation in spring. In summer, bears avoided grassland that have significantly higher temperature than the other habitats. For autumn, in morning, habitat selection model included temperature and vegetation variables, but there is not significant difference in temperatures among vegetation in the time of this season. Next, I explained the result of activity patterns changes for the only summer. It is because bears showed heat avoidance behavior in this season. These figures show relationship between temperature and odds ratio of each activity pattern compared to resting as reference category. Odds ratio are higher than 1, meaning that bears selected the feeding or traveling, and lower than 1, meaning that bears selected resting. The color of lines indicates vegetation types. From noon feeding figure, as temperature becomes higher, Bears feed in broad-leaved forests that has significantly lower temperature than grassland. But temperature becomes lower. Bears feed in grassland that has significantly higher temperature than other habitats. The evening feeding figure shows same trend as noon feeding figure. And in the morning and at night, bears mainly rest under all vegetation types regardless temperature changes. In summary, bear avoid heat stress in summer by selection of dense forests such as conifer forests or broad-leaved forests. And selection of broad-leaved forests or grassland as feeding sites was affected by the changes in temperature. Our results suggest bears may maximize food intake with avoiding high temperature habitat. However, they avoided heat and moved away from grassland, and in this habitat there is ants for food resource for bears containing some proteins and amino acids that cannot be obtained from food resources in broad-leaved forests. When habitat selection due to avoiding heat stress is possibly more frequent as global warming proceeds, the gap between nutritional requirements and food resources bear can get may become bigger, and it can lead to bad nutritional condition. To consider the adaptation of bears under climate change, we need to pay attention on changes in nutrient acquisition and nutritional condition caused by changes in behavior and movement. Thank you very much.
Well, that was very interesting talk, Kahoko, listening about bears in Japan and how they change their behavioral pattern according to changing temperature between various habitats. For the audience, we'll be taking question at the end of the session. So if you have any question for any of the speakers, just write their name, the speaker's name, and your question in our Q&A session uh, column. And we'll be taking all of those questions at the end of this session. With that, let's move to our second speaker. So our second speaker is Svitlana Kudrinko. She is affiliated with Frankfurt Zoological Society and University of Freiburg, Germany. She is research fellow at this institute working on her PhD and currently working in Carpathians. Her research focus is mainly on human large carnivore coexistence. Today, she is talking about human injuries and fatalities by brown bears in Russia, revealing a link between habitat degradation and human-wildlife conflict. Over to you, Svitlana.
Thank you. Okay. Is everything fine?
Yes, looks good.
Can you see the slide?
Yes.
Yes, I would like to present the results of our study on how human injuries and fatalities in Russia are linked to human encroachment there. Large carnivore attacks are very rare compared to incidents caused by other wildlife. Yet carnivore attacks were reported to increase worldwide, and bears are, unfortunately for bears, among the carnivores that most often attack people. Frequency of brown bear attacks has been associated with various factors. Increasing bear population, especially in areas with improving bear conservation and decreasing hunting pressure. Then bear food conditioning, particularly in places without bear-proof garbage containers and improper garbage storing. Then with human negligence in bear country, for example, in areas where bears have returned or have been reintroduced in recent years, with interannual changes in food availability, like pine seeds, berries.
Excuse me, Svitlana,
Sorry?
sorry, your slide are in preview mode, so we see.
Okay. Sorry. Good.
Yeah,
That's why I
I'm
asked.
sorry to interrupt you, but that's what we could
No,
see.
that's fine. Let's see if everything is okay. Good.
Yes,
Is it
now
better
it
now?
looks fine. Yeah.
Good. Let's see if I can take it away. No. Good. Then with okay, so with annual fluctuations in food availability, such as pine seeds, berries, salmonids, food availability has been claimed to have a link with annual variation in human-bear conflict in various places like Yellowstone and Siberia. Then the last factor is habitat destruction that has also been claimed to be linked with the pattern of brown bear attacks, yet has not been proved to the same extent for brown bears as for other carnivorous species around the globe. Keeping all that in mind, we have decided to analyze analyze the spatial pattern and frequency of brown bear caused casualties, as well as factors influencing the occurrence of casualties. And we did that for Russia, a country that holds approximately, as has been claimed, approximately 50% of brown bear population, yet where brown bears have not been studied to this equally thoroughly as compared to other countries. Let's see. We divided Russia in three parts, European Russia, Siberia, and the Far East, based on their climatic, ecological differences, as well as human footprint. According to official data resources, density of paved roads in Russia has increased since 1991, potentially favoring human access to formerly remote areas and causing forest fragmentation. Forest loss and degradation due to fire and logging have been happening in Russia at the larger scale for quite a while. Although fire is essential in boreal ecosystems, recent unprecedented fire frequency and intensity is a relatively new phenomenon. So we hypothesized that brown bear caused casualties per year may be positively related to annual bear population size, paved road density, and casualties are more frequent within the range of edible seed-producing Siberian pine that provides a crucial autumn food for brown bears than outside the Siberian pine range. We modeled an association between annual number of bear casualties and estimated brown bear population, annual paved road density, forest degraded based on satellite data, as well as presence-absence of Siberian pine. We conducted analyses at regional scale. It means we run models separately for European Russia, Siberia, and the Far East. And as we found a correlation between brown bear population and road density, we ran additional separate sets of generalized linear models for each of the region, means European Russia, Siberia, and the Far East, separately with bears and roads. We did not include bear encounters without injuries, most because of underreportedness, and we didn't include the percentage of forest area or forested area, as this variable might sometimes be called, due to very low variability. So I won't go into many details about methods because all of them are described in our manuscript that is currently under review, but we'll jump to the juicy part. So the results. Between 2001 and 2018, at least brown bears in Russia injured at least 178 and killed 132 people. And 82% of casualties occurred in Asian Russia, means in Siberia and the Far East, as shown on this graph. Which is rather predictable, given high brown bear density and large potential habitats existing in Siberia and the Far East, as shown on this map from a report on brown bears published in 2013. Most victims were gathering non-timber resources, means berries, pine seeds, mushrooms, fern. Other casualties include hikers. People were also attacked in or near human settlements. Those worked outdoors, mainly loggers and workers at oil and gas fields, as well as fishermen and hunters. Bear hunters were rarely injured, most probably due to underreportedness of such cases. So in European Russia, casualties were positively associated with the size of brown bear population and negative with the presence of Siberian pine, most probably because of the limited range of Siberian pine in European Russia, as shown on this map. And as Siberian pine in European Russia occurs in remote areas with low human population density, and commercial gathering of pine seeds is lower in European Russia than as compared to Siberia. In Siberia, casualties were positively associated with brown bear population size and with paved road density, which is not surprising given the high changes in road density, especially after 2010, as shown on this map at the bottom. And as you see in Siberian administrative units, the paved road density truly increased as compared to previous years or as compared to other parts of Russia. In Siberia, brown bear casualties were also positively associated with the presence of Siberian pine, which is rather predictable once you look at the spatial distribution of bear casualties within, means in this green area, and outside the Siberian pine range. In the Far East, we obtained results that were not clear, probably because we did not include the abundance of salmonids, presence of or absence of Korean and dwarf pines, as we simply didn't obtain the data. We didn't have access to reliable and reliable data sets. So the take-home message I would like to finish is such. Our study has demonstrated that even though the Asian Russia in Siberia and the Far East has one of the lowest road densities at the global scale, negative effects of roads on wildlife conservation and bear conservation is still an issue there. Increasing road density favors human access to remote areas and causes forest fragmentation. Expanded network of paved roads has similarly provided greater access to remote areas within Siberian pine range. Better access to forests with Siberian pine stands may have increased encounters between people and bears seeking the very same resource, edible pine seeds. These edible pine seeds provide nutritious food for bears before denning and a substantial seasonal income for locals who gather pine seeds commercially for sale and export. We didn't have data, as I mentioned before, on annual abundance of salmonids in the Far East. And we suggested it would be important to investigate changes in salmon numbers to better understand the role of salmonids in bears' seasonal diet in the coastal Far East, and how varying salmon abundance may potentially result in more frequent bear casualties. Thank you for your attention. And I would also like to express my sincere gratitude to my master's project supervisors and thank them for their patience, their support, and tons of advice. I would also like to thank all co-authors for providing data and sharing ideas, as well as those who shared the insights of data analysis and visualization when my master's project was still ongoing.
Well, thank you for a very interesting talk, Svitlana. Human bear conflict is definitely a cause of concern for bear conservation in Asia. I come from India, and in South Asia, we have 4 species of bears. So we have sloth bears, Asiatic black bear, brown bear, and sun bear, of course. And in India and Sri Lanka, sloth bear is causing a lot of damage to people and property. And so is Asiatic black bear in Himalayan region. And if you think about human population and paved road there, it makes the situation really complex. So good to hear about your talk. And as I said, we'll take question and answers at the end of the session. I would also like to, I actually forgot to introduce my co-moderator, Rajan. So Rajan, if you can turn on your video for a minute, I would like to introduce you over here. So Rajan, he's co-moderating this session with me. He's PhD student at Hokkaido University in Japan. He is from Nepal, and he's working on sloth bear population genetics and other ecological parameters in Nepal. So Rajan will be helping me in this entire session. Thanks, Rajan.
Yeah, thank you.
So with that, let's move to our third speaker. His name is Jamshid Parchizadeh, and you probably won't be able to see him here because he's not with us in this session. I spoke with him, and he told me that he is suffering due to COVID, and his doctor has asked him to take some rest. So he won't be here with us, not even for question and answer session, but that should not deter us from asking questions to him. I can send these questions to him, and probably he will reply to you individually. But so please ask questions on his talk. Let me introduce him. So Jamshid Parchizadeh, he's from Iran, as I said, and he's affiliated with Global Wildlife Conservation Center and State University of New York College of Environmental Science and Forestry, US. His research interests, they include large carnivore ecology, carnivore human predator prey interactions, and the ways to manage these large carnivore populations and their conservation. And today, he'll be talking to us about brown bear human encounters in Iran, resulting in injury or death. So another topic on human bear conflict from Asia. So moving on to Jamshid's talk.
Hello everyone, my name is Jamshid. I hope you are doing well. I'm not feeling well at all. I've got COVID and the doctors have ordered me to rest and sleep. However, Since I do believe that our research findings on brown bears in Iran are really important, I decided to present them to you, though I'm eager. So if you are ready, let's get started and talk about brown bears in Iran. Two bear species occur in Iran: the Asiatic black bears and brown bears. The Asiatic black bears occur in three provinces in the south and southeast of the country. The name of the provinces are Sistan and Baluchistan, Hormozgan, and Kerman. On the other hand, brown bears occur in the Alborz Mountains in the north, the Zagros Mountains in the west, and the Arasparan Biosphere Reserve in the northwest of the country. Little is known about brown bears in Iran, and we need basic information to produce practical management and conservation strategies. One of these information we need is information on human-bear interactions, which mainly occur in two forms: human-caused mortality of bears and brown bear attacks on humans. This is our study area, Iran, located in the Middle East. The green one represents my country. We conducted a Farsi Grey literature search using the Google Internet search engine to compile and access all material confirmed, published, and disseminated by Iran's Department of the Environment. Iran's Department of the Environment is the governmental organization responsible for conserving Iran's fauna and flora. So we compiled all this information between 2005 and 2020. We used some search terms in Farsi for human-caused mortality of brown bears and brown bear attacks on humans. For human-caused mortality of brown bears, we use these search terms: common species name plus mortality or fatality or casualty or illegal killing or poaching. And for brown bear attacks on humans, we use common species name plus attack plus human or people. We compiled some variables for reported human-caused mortalities. For example, number of bears killed and their genders, that's male or female, age classes of bears as dependent young. Dependent young is an animal with mother less than 1 year old. Then juvenile, which is between 1 and 2 years old and is an independent animal but not quite capable of reproduction. And adult, which is over 2 years old, and adult is an independent animal, quite capable of reproduction. Then time of day as day from sunrise to sunset, or night from sunset to sunrise. Then intentional or accidental killing. Intentional killing included illegally shot, poisoned, stoned, and trapped. And accidental killing included car collision or vehicle collision and train collision. Then we obtained geographic location for each incident. Again, for reported attacks on humans, we compiled some variables, such as number of people involved and their genders, male or female, age classes of humans as child between 0 and 9 years old, adolescent between 10 and 18 years old, or adult over 18 years old. Then time of day again as day from sunrise to sunset, or night from sunset to sunrise. Then outcome of attack, what was the result of the attack, injury or death. Attack motivation as predatory to livestock. For example, when people were defending their livestock from bears attacks or defensive acts by bears. For instance, when bears were defending their cubs, foods, or when they were surprised or provoked or harassed by humans. And then again, we got geographic location for each incident. Overall, we obtained 132 reported human-caused mortality of brown bears. Females and adults were attacked more frequently. Most of these attacks occurred during the day. Over 80% of these attacks were intentional. When we take a look at accidental killing categories, we find out that car collision was responsible for over 80%. And when we take a look at intentional killing categories, unfortunately, we see that most of these birds were killed by, firearms. Then we obtained 52 reported brown bear attacks on humans. Adults and males were, because we are talking about humans here. So adult males were attacked more frequently during the day, and the result of the attack was mainly injury than death. Shepherds were attacked most by bears, and when we take a look at the last graph, we see that over 80% was because of defensive act by bears, and this is really important. This is Iran's map again, and we have shown encounter locations on this map. The red circles represent brown bear attacks on humans, and the green stars represent human-caused mortality of brown bears across Iran. This map also shows the distribution of brown bears in Iran. So what does all this mean? This means that encroachment of human activities onto brown bears' natural habitat, which includes livestock grazing, can result in human-bear interactions. So what are our recommendations and conclusions? First, the DOE, which is the governmental organization in charge or responsible for conserving Iran's fauna and flora, should work with other Iranian organizations, including the Iranian police, to restrict the access of shepherds and their herds to bear habitats, because most of these encounters occurred in these areas. So what the DOE should do exactly? The DOE should fence some areas which is far away from brown bears habitats, and encourage shepherds to take their herds to these fenced areas instead of taking their herds to some places where encounters occur. Then educate local people about the ecological importance of brown bears, actual risks posed, and how to respond during encounters. For instance, all nomadic people across Iran are permitted to have firearms to defend themselves, their crops, agricultural crops, or livestock. So when a nomad sees a bear, whether the threat is perceived or real, the nomad can shoot the bear, can kill the bear, and this is really terrible. When people are educated, this can be reduced. And the third recommendation we have is increase the number of wildlife rangers within protected areas, because most of these conflicts occurred in these areas due to human encroachment. The number of wildlife rangers in Iran is really few, unfortunately. So we obtained our data from the following papers. I invite you to read them if you are interested. And again, sorry for my poor presentation. I tried to do my best, but you know, when you are ill, it is really difficult to present what you have. I hope you have enjoyed my presentation. First, Dr. Blunt is my academic supervisor at SUNY ESF. You may wish to contact either of us if you have any questions. Thank you very much. Have a great day.
Well, that was another interesting talk about human-bear conflict situation, this time from Iran and brown bears. And I really wish that Jamshid was here with us to discuss some of the questions that are probably coming in from our audience. So moving on, our fourth speaker is Professor Shinsuke Koike, and he is working at Tokyo University of Agriculture and Technology in Japan. Professor Koike has been studying ecological aspects of black bears, specifically their foraging ecology in Japan and Russia's Primorsky territory for more than 20 years. He is talking to us from Tokyo today, and he'll be talking to us about his research on estimating the seasonal energy balance in Asian black bears and the associated factors. So over to you, Professor Koike.
Thank you. Okay. Hi, everyone. Energy obtained from food resources forms the fundamental basis of biological activity. Thus, energy intake is an essential factor in evaluating an animal's nutritional state. It is also important, however, to consider the energy balance. Few studies to date have directly examined the energy balance in wildlife, instead using models to predict potential energetic cost or requirements, because unlike with domestic animals, accurately measuring these values in free-ranging animals poses several difficulties. Yeah, this. So previous studies devised a formula that can be applied to all mammals for estimating energy consumed during activity states such as resting, traveling, or feeding, based on the body mass. Because of the inherent difficulties in conducting field studies of large carnivores that are not directly observable, few studies have attempted to convert estimated energetic requirement of wild carnivores to prey requirement. Thus, estimating the energy balance remains a challenge. However, for species that are not easily observed, those for which it is difficult to calculate the proportion of time spent on each activity and omnivores. Asiatic black bears are omnivores that are difficult to observe directly, relying heavily on plant food items. Bears seasonally shift their diets. Therefore, it is possible that the energy balance of bears also fluctuates seasonally. In addition, the amount of hard mass in autumn, such as nuts or acorns fluctuates widely among years. Studies suggest that bears adjust their food habits and behavior in accordance with the amount of hard mass availability. And the degree of behavior change differs between the sexes. Therefore, the energy balance likely varies widely between good masked years and poor masked years, and between males and females. So in this study, we estimated the daily energy balance of Asian black bears during different periods of the year. We test two hypotheses. First, spring provides a sufficient food supply from refresh of deciduous broadleaf trees, whereas autumn provides extensive hard mass. Thus, we expect that the daily energy balance of bears will exhibit two peak patterns, rising temporarily in spring, dropping into the lowest point in summer, and peaking in autumn. Second hypothesis, in poor masked years, bears must obtain substitute food items by expanding their home ranges and activities, which in turn increase their energy expenditure, ultimately lowering the energy balance in poor masked years for both sexes. So this study was conducted in the Ashioniko Mountains in central parts of Japan. Here, more than 100 individuals have been surveyed with GPS colors since 2003. For estimation of energy intake, first, the major food items of each season were identified by fecal analysis, and the energy value of these food items were calculated by nutrient analysis. Next, the foraging speed of each food items were calculated by direct observation by video camera. We also estimated foraging behavior time using switching state space model based on the GPS tracking information of each individuals and calculated for the foraging time per day. By multiplying these values together, thus we calculated the amount of energy intake. So next, for estimates energy expenditure, similarly, from the GPS tracking information of each individual, the estimated times of foraging, resting, and traveling time per day were calculated. In addition, we calculated the amount of energy consumed for each behavior using an equation that is considered to apply to all mammals. By multiplying these values together, we calculated the amount of energy consumed. Here is result. Both energy intake and energy balance showed a bimodal pattern, decreasing from May to July, rising again. Here. So upper is a male, under is a female, and this left is the energy intake, right is the energy balance. Center is energy expenditure. So decreasing from May to July, rising again from August to October, and decline in November. Here. And the peaks of energy intake and energy balance were larger in good masked years than in poor masked years for female. But the difference between masked condition was not clear for male. The pattern of energy expenditure shows the moderately greater fluctuations for males. Energy expenditure peaked and started decreasing from September in poor master years. But in good master years, it continued increasing. The energy expenditure of female in both mast conditions showed changes similar to those of males in good mast years. So, discussion. So, daily energy balance exhibited seasonal change with relative bimodal pattern, rising in spring, falling to the lowest point in summer, and peaking in autumn, thus supporting hypothesis 1. Our results suggest that since the daily energy balance is positive in May, spring temporarily offers a good feeding environment because deciduous trees and grasses undergo defrush. Also, food quality is not as good as it is in autumn. The daily energy balance may have been positive in May for both sexes because daily energy expenditure is low and daily digestive energy intake rises temporarily. So next is in summer, our results show summer to be a relatively difficult period for bears of both sexes, but especially males. There appear to be some underlying reasons for this. The one of that is that even so daily energy expenditure does not differ from that of other seasons, the daily digestive energy intake is extremely low. So next is autumn. The importance of accumulating energy by consuming hard mass in autumn has been highlighted by many studies of bears. Our findings also show that the daily energy balance becomes greater in autumn. In the current study, the energy balance became substantially positive from September to November because digestible energy intake rose during that period, while energy expenditure remained the same. So next discussion. So we found internal differences in the daily energy balance during autumn, but only for female. Female had lower energy balance in poor mast years compared to good mast years due to their lower digestive energy intake. But there was no difference in energy expenditure between the masting conditions of both sexes. Therefore, our hypothesis 2 is partly supported. So why is there a sex-specific difference in digestive energy intake? There are some possible reasons. First, even in poor mast years, there are small patches with highly productive trees. Males may have advantage over female in finding new productive patches because males tend to have larger home range. Second, male bears tend to disperse from the natal area. Therefore, males likely have better knowledge of more productive patches across a broader area. So conclusion. So this study involved a combination of intensive radio telemetry monitoring of bear movement and activities, for food sampling, and observational studies of bear foraging activities. So this combination of methods, we were able to estimate for the first time of the energy balance in Asian black bears because we made several assumptions in applying energetic equations that were not specifically developed for bears and using surrogate values for some parameters. There could be potential biases associated with these assumptions. However, this study enhances our knowledge of bears' energy budget in particular and will have important implications for their conservation and management. Thank you.
That was another interesting talk from our speakers. Thanks for your talk, Professor Koike. And I myself have several questions for your talk that I'll ask at the end of the session. So let's move on to our next speaker. Our next speaker is Arzoo Malik. She's from India. She's affiliated to Department of Environmental Science, Faculty of Science at Maharaja Sayaji Rao University of Vadodara in India. She's also affiliated to Wildlife and Conservation Biology Research Lab again in Gujarat, India. She's pursuing her PhD studies in environmental science, and her research focus is on using geospatial technology to find out solutions for sloth bear human conflict. She'll be talking about monitoring sloth bear movement around water sources to assess the effectiveness of water management in sloth bear habitat in Gujarat state in India. So over to you, Arzoo.
Thank you so much, Sandeep. Hello, everyone. Today I'll be presenting my research work entitled as Monitoring Sloth Bear Movement Around Water Sources to Assess the Effectiveness of Water Management in Sloth Bear Habitat. India holds more than 80% of sloth bear population in the world, and with growing human population, the coexistence between these two species is becoming a major issue. In recent years, many times news articles, research papers, and magazine articles have highlighted the rising conflict in our country, where people residing close to sloth bear habitat are being attacked or being killed, and as a retaliatory approach, sloth bear is being shot down or being killed by the angry mob. This basically highlights the hostile nature of humans towards this species in our country. The trend line here shows the number of attacks recorded in Gujarat state from the year 2004 to 2016. As you can see, in 2005, the number recorded was 8, which pretty much escalates and goes up to 68 in the year of 2013. If we look at the same data seasonally, it gives a quite clear picture that the number of attacks recorded in summer were quite high as compared to the other season. Now, there might be other factors that might be playing and driving sloth bear either towards human-dominated areas or humans frequently visiting sloth bear habitat for some reasons that might be resulting in sudden encounters and ultimately leading to conflict situations. In our area, the two main reasons that have been identified for the conflict between these two are one is sharing of forest resources, and the other one is movement of sloth bear into the villages in search of food and water, or humans moving inside the forest area for collecting forest produce, hence encountering sloth bears and leading to attacks. To understand this conflict situation, we need to focus on the movement of sloth bear, and the movement of sloth bear is primarily driven by two basic needs of the species, which is food resources and water resources. However, in the dry deciduous forest where sloth bear is residing in Gujarat state, food may be less of an issue as sloth bear is a generalist. Whereas in the semi-arid zone, water scarcity can be a problem and act as a limiting factor for sloth bear movement. We also tried to record sloth bear presence signs all over the state, which were further divided into different categories based on the areas they were found in. The pie chart shows that 16% signs were found in close proximity to water bodies present in the areas. Out of these 16%, 61% were found within the 1 kilometer of the water bodies. To understand the relationship between water bodies and sloth bear attacks on human, we try to overlay the conflict locations on the Jessore sloth bear sanctuary map, representing natural water bodies. As you can see, majority of attacks were taken place within the 1 kilometer proximity of water bodies present inside the area, reflecting that water can be a limiting factor for sloth bear. We also tried to calculate the Euclidean distance between the sloth bear presence signs recorded in the water bodies, as this bar chart shows that a significant number of signs were found within the 500 to 1,000 meters of the distance. And as we move further from these water bodies, the sign that were recorded reduces. This leads to the aim of our study, which is to establish a relationship between water availability and bear presence, considering water as a limiting resource affecting the bear movement in the area. This map represents our study area, which represents two main sanctuaries, Jessore Sloth Bear Sanctuary and Balaram Ambaji Wildlife Sanctuary, located in the foothill regions of Aravallis in the northern region of Gujarat state. These two sanctuaries are well known for inhabiting maximum density of sloth bear in the whole state. The temperature here goes up to 48 degrees Celsius in summers. Low rainfall and infrequent rainfall and dry climatic conditions often lead to drought-like conditions in the area, leading to water scarcity for the wildlife present here. To achieve our objective, we needed to identify natural water bodies present inside these two sanctuaries. For that, we generated drainage map using hydrological tools in ArcGIS. 26 water bodies were identified, which were surveyed in two phases. One was before monsoon, the other one was after monsoon. And for surveying these water bodies, we tried to do a foot transect of 100 meters in three possible directions, which were towards north, east, and west. And we tried to record all the bear presence sites like claw marks, cat, and pug marks, showing the presence of the bear in that area. Along with that, we also calculated and recorded elevation, slope, proximity to settlement, and the presence of food resources, type of habitat, all these parameters which might be affecting the movement of sloth bears. We also tried to put camera traps to record the frequency of bears visiting these water bodies. However, due to lockdown situation, we lost majority of our camera traps and we lost majority of our data. So we were not able to produce significant results based on the camera trap pictures. However, I could retrieve some pictures and which shows sloth bear visiting these water bodies along with hyena and leopard. The maps here shows the drainage pattern that was generated through hydrological tools. The orange dots here illustrate the water bodies that were identified and were being monitored. As you can see, before monsoon, all water bodies were found with bear presence signs. However, the trend changes after monsoon, where only 12 water points were identified with bear presence signs, which might be due to the fact that after monsoon, water was quite uniformly present throughout the sanctuary area, and there was no need for these bears to visit the water bodies that were being monitored. So we identified all these parameters like elevation, slope, and proximity to settlement, presence of food, type of habitat, and the species preferred by sloth bear as independent parameters that might be affecting sloth bear movement. And we tried to form a correlation matrix to find any significant association between them. However, moderate to low correlation was only identified between these possible parameters. As this study was an experimental study and our data was limited to 26 observations, so we tried to run decision tree algorithm where we merged both the pre-monsoon and post-monsoon data. And this decision tree analysis is quite difficult to read, so I divided it into 3 subsequent slides where it is easy to understand. So blue color here shows the presence of sloth bear with respect to different parameters that I just talked about. And the other color shows absent of bears with respect to all those parameters. This shows that when the settlement proximity is approximately 5 kilometers, the 27 bear presence signs was recorded. However, when proximity is less than 1 kilometer or the bear presence signs recorded to be 12. This emphasizes that whenever we are moving further from the settlement area, the probability of finding bear increases. Also, this decision tree analysis tells us that if preferred plant species of sloth bear are not present and elevation is equal to 339 meters, probability of finding a sloth bear reduces in the area. And also, if slope is 9 degree or less and it is before monsoon, the probability of finding sloth bear decreases. We also tried to validate our algorithm by running the model accuracy, which tells us it was about approximately 72%. Just because we were not able to continue our data collection due to lockdown situation, we also tried to run the logistic regression on the data we had. Here we regressed sloth bear presence signs against the independent parameters at the significance level of 0.05. However, no significant association could have been established between these parameters. However, the closest value that we got was a type of habitat that might be having some positive impact on sloth bear movement in the area. As it was a semi-arid zone, we tried to form a link to understand the water scarcity, we tried to form a link between the average rainfall received in the area and number of sloth bear attacks recorded. As you can see, the red line represents the average rainfall, and the blue line represents, my bad, average rainfall is represented by a red line and rainfall is represented by the blue line. So the decrease in precipitation received, the number of attacks increase in the subsequent summer. A huge spike is observed in 2013, and you can see that average rainfall that was received previous year was below average line. More than 20 attacks have been recorded whenever there is rainfall received was below average. The region is prone to frequent water scarcity as the lowest annual rainfall received is approximately 345 millimeters. In summers, water retention capacity decreases with increase in temperature as moisture content reduces due to high evaporation rate. To combat this water scarcity, we have proposed an idea of conserving water using sustainable structures to the forest department, and I have tried to show that idea through these illustrations. As you can see, a hole can be dug up on the downside of the water bodies, where a used container or drum can be put inside with a customized sieve-like covering, which allows only rainwater to go seep inside. And whenever there is a drought-like condition, we can use a portable pump to drain out that water and provide it for wildlife throughout the year. Thank you, and I would like to extend my thank to IBA for providing me financial assistance, Chief Wildlife Warden for Forest Department for allowing me to work in the protected areas, Dr. Nishit Dharaya and his lab for guiding me throughout the study, and IUCN Bear Specialist Group. Thank you.
Thanks, Arzoo. It was interesting talk. Looking at bear range, sloth bear range in India, where they occupy mostly dry region, water is definitely an important driving factor in their in their ecology mainly. And I also like that you, at the end of your talk, you provided a solution which is very important for their conservation. So I'm sure we'll have questions for you at the end of the session. But before that, let's move on to our next speaker. And before we move on to our next speaker, let me take a couple of moments to discuss about issues of virtual conferences in our part of the world, in Asia. So of course, network connectivity is a major issue. If you get good network, consider that as blessing. Along with good network, continuous network is also a blessing in our part of the world. not so much in India, but other neighboring countries, talking about Myanmar and other countries in Southeast Asia. It's very difficult. But the other problem that I have seen is the different time zones. So as you know, that the time shown here in IBA conference website is the mountain time in the US. And one of our participants, the next speaker, probably got confused with that timing. So she thought that the session will start later. She just texted me and she said that because of this confusion, she won't be able to attend the session today. No, I see her here. I'm sorry. I see Amira here. So Amira, will you be able to give your presentation if you can hear us? Okay, so I don't see any response from her. I have her recorded talk with me, so I'm going to play her recorded talk. And hopefully she'll be there for question and answer session. Meanwhile, Rajan, if you can chat with her in person so that she is available for question and answer session.
Yeah,
So
sure.
I'll play her talk and then we'll get information from her.
Today and everyone present here. My name is Amira Sharif and I am here to throw light on a research article which is entitled Identifying Himalayan Brown Bear Conservation Areas in Lahaul Valley, Himachal Pradesh. Globally, elusive carnivores are severely impacted by three major factors which are habitat loss, human disturbance, and the third one which is increasing at an alarming rate and needs immediate attention and action is climate change. Monitoring population of such species is pivotal for their long-term survival and for effective conservation and management strategies, especially for those species which are under increasing threat, such as brown bear. It is imperative to identify and map their suitable habitats. Brown bear is one such species and is widely distributed in northern hemisphere, occurring in North America, Europe, Eastern and Central Asia, and Himalayan brown bear is its subspecies, which is distributed in northern parts of Pakistan and northwestern regions of India. In India, its approximate distribution area is about 36,800 square kilometers, and only 10% of the area is under protected areas. As you can see here in map, a study done by Mukherjee et al., the blue regions are the most suitable areas, which are mostly outside protected areas, and the suitable patches which are under protected areas will be lost in future climate change scenario. Approximately 58.23% of the area will be lost in RCP 4.5 and 60.36% will be lost in RCP 8.5 by 2050. Here are few studies which highlights the different aspects of brown bear, among which the most recent one, which is adaptive spatial planning of protected area network for conserving the Himalayan brown bear by Mukherjee et al., highlights that most of the suitable habitat will be lost in future climate change scenario. Even though the IUCN status of the species is least concern, but the population of Himalayan brown bear is threatened, which is so due to the fact that they are being the victim of retaliatory killing because they attack their livestock, they damage their crops, which causes a huge economic loss to the local community. And the second major threat for Himalayan brown bear is habitat loss. So we felt the need of the hour is conservation and management planning, which demands exhaustive information on various life history traits, its occupancy, its distribution range in India. And occupancy is a prerequisite for undertaking any ecological study, especially for Himalayan, which is lacking for Himalayan brown bear in its distribution range in India. Hence, there is a need to identify areas with conservation potential for implementing landscape level strategies. And in order to identify such areas, The present study was conducted in Lahaul Valley for conservation of Himalayan brown bear. So our sole objective was to identify the conservation priority areas for Himalayan brown bear in Lahaul Valley, and for which we divided the area into 10 into 10 square kilometer grids, and field survey was conducted from August to December during 2018, and total of 56 trails were traversed, which accounts a total distance of 544 kilometers, and 40 camera traps were deployed, which yielded a total trap nights of 786 in all the forest ranges of Lahaul Forest Division. For understanding the occupancy of Himalayan brown bear, we use landscape variables which were pertinent to the ecology and behavior of the species, and hence 11 potential landscape variables were extracted either from field or using ArcGIS, which were spatially independent of each other. And these variables were categorized into three categories, that is topographic, land use, land cover, and the third one is anthropogenic variables. Presence absence locations along with habitat variables were modeled in presence software, which is one of the most robust and accepted platform for conducting occupancy analysis. Total effort of 56 trail walks and 40 camera traps resulted in 161 detection instances of Himalayan brown bear, which yielded a live occupancy of 0.54, and range-wise mean estimated occupancy was found to be 0.56 to 0.75, and overall mean estimated site occupancy was found to be 0.01 to 1.0. The red blocks in the map are representing the high occupancy probability areas of Himalayan brown bear, and the green ones are the areas which are representing least probable occupancy probability areas of Himalayan brown bear in the landscape. Based on the lowest AIC, our top model suggested that agricultural land had positive influence on the occupancy of Himalayan brown bear, and while on the other hand, the supporting model suggests that human settlement plus alpine grassland had negative influence on the detection probability of Himalayan brown bear. So, the summary of our findings was that top model indicated the site occupancy of Himalayan brown bear was best predicted by agricultural land, and during our field survey we observed that the local communities in the landscape are mostly agrarian, that is they are totally dependent on agricultural fields, the main source of their livelihood. And we also observed the raiding of agricultural crops by Himalayan brown bear, which caused a huge economic loss to the farmers, and which leads into the retaliatory killing of brown bear to minimize their economic losses. Negative relationship with distance to human settlement suggests that Himalayan brown bear is avoiding areas close to human settlements, indicating the species is sensitive to anthropogenic disturbances. Higher occupancy values of Himalayan brown bear in Patan and Udaipur forest ranges of the landscape suggest that these two ranges could be considered for implementing conservation and management activities, and these areas of high Himalayan brown bear occupancy can generate good quality data about their population densities through long-term monitoring. So, to minimize bear human conflict, we strongly recommend to adopt measures such as habitat enrichment in its natural environment to prevent their movement to agricultural crops. And the second one is to develop conservation and management strategies focusing both animal as well as human aspects, considering the current conservation status of Himalayan brown bear and the economic losses which locals are facing. And the third one which we feel is to study long-term study on population ecology and habitat utilization pattern for proper conservation and management. Lastly, we conclude that Himalayan brown bear is frequently visiting agricultural crops for meeting their dietary requirements, which increases the instances of bear human conflict which is a serious threat for conservation. And the areas which are having high occupancy probability, that is Patan and Udaipur forest ranges, should be considered for long-term viability of the species. Hence, it needs intensive sampling and long-term monitoring for securing the future of the species while addressing bear-human conflict. Thank you so much.
Well, again, interesting talk by Amira Sharif. And in fact, I forgot to introduce her when I was introducing her topic. So Amira Sharif, she's from India, and she works as Senior Research Fellow at Wildlife Institute of India and Zoological Society of India. And her work is on musk deer, which is an endangered um, herbivore species, herbivore species in higher altitude of Himalayas in India, and she's interested in carnivores of Himalaya. So that was about Amira. Let's move on to our next talk. Next speaker. Just a second. So before we move on to our next speaker, let me again talk for a minute about these issues of virtual meeting, because our speakers are ranging from, they are located all the way from Japan. I think 3 of our participants are located in Japan, including our co-moderator Rajan. And our last speaker of this session, Elizabeth Davis, she is based in California. So basically, among our speakers, we are covering the entire range, almost the entire globe. So Elizabeth, she's postdoctoral associate at San Diego Zoo Wildlife Alliance in California, USA. Her research motivation is about consumption of bear body parts in Asia with the aim of using this information to design demand reduction campaigns within Asia. The title of her talk is there internal demand for bear parts in Myanmar in Asia? And she's going to give her recorded talk. So this session, although it was supposed to be a live session, but it seems like it's getting a recorded talk session, which is okay. So I'll be playing her talk in a minute. And then with that, I think we have covered all the speakers. So please send your questions, and then we'll switch on to question and answer session at the end of her talk. So give me a minute and I'll play her talk for you.
Elizabeth Davis. I'm here representing San Diego Zoo Wildlife Alliance, and I'm going to be talking about, is there internal demand for bear parts in Myanmar? This was a study done with Instituto Oikos, and this was actually an exploratory study in Rakhine State. So we couldn't answer this very big question of internal demand for bear parts across the whole of Myanmar, but we made a good start into illustrating at least a little bit what's going on. The research was led by myself, Jenny Glickman, and Lorenzo Gaffi, and we had invaluable support from Julia Musoni. So, to give this context, bear products are used widely throughout Cambodia, Laos, and Vietnam. I'm only mentioning these 3 countries because they're part of the greater Mekong region, which Myanmar is as well. So these are the countries where we have documented use. Thailand, to date, we don't have any documentation of use of bear products, but we do know that bear products are used widely in these 3 other countries. Of course, for those of you who are aware of this issue, China is a really big consumer of bear bile, just in raw numbers. But since they are not part of Southeast Asia, I have not illustrated them here as a comparison point. And bear products are used widely because a theory is that part of the reason they're used widely is due to legitimate medicinal efficacy, particularly in Asiatic black bear bile. There's known efficacy. Sun bear bile, to date, we don't have any evidence that it's effective in any way. However, I have put here bear products, as all bear products are demanded. Sun bears and Asiatic black bears both are poached for their gallbladders, and Asiatic black bears are farmed more often than sun bears, but sun bears have been found on farms as well. And bears are known to be poached in Myanmar, and in some areas, their products are known to be traded primarily to the Chinese market. So the north of Myanmar and the Golden Triangle area is where bear gallbladder has been documented as being traded across the border to Chinese middlemen. And endemic demand until our study was really largely unknown, although bear gallbladder was sold for use in traditional Mon medicine at Jaktio, which is a Buddhist pilgrimage site. And again, unclear really whether this was to fulfill demand from people in Myanmar, so Mon people or another ethnic group, or whether it was to fulfill Chinese demand, because a lot of Chinese pilgrims and tourists would go to Jaktio. And we also knew that bears were being poached in Rakhine. So in this study, we wanted to investigate whether they're being poached for medicine, whether there is a lot of use of bear bile and demand for bear bile in Rakhine. So Rakhine State is bounded by the Indian Ocean and the Rakhine-Yoma Range, which is a mountainous range filled with not just sun bears, but also Asiatic black bears sometimes, less so, and tigers and elephants and all kinds of large jungle fauna. For our study, we chose 52 villages in a 2-hour radius from Chintuli town, and we proportionally chose the number of respondents from each location. Myanmar's very low population density, so we had to be very careful that we didn't census an entire village and disproportionately represent those motivations or behaviors compared to everywhere else. So we performed 327 structured surveys and 66 semi-structured interviews. Structured surveys, so where respondents can only say yes, no, or A, B, C, D, they're very constrained in their responses. That was used to identify broad patterns. So what percentage of people have used bear bile? Very, very broad, sort of general level information. Semi-structured interviews enable us to gain context and insight into those broad patterns identified, so we can say, okay, 20% of people are using bear bile. What's the context? Why are they using the bear bile? What were those motivations driving that use? And responses were all anonymous, and we did have ethical approval. So in the structured surveys, we utilized 2 specialized questioning techniques as well to overcome bias when individuals are deceitful. So consumption of bear bile or use of bear products is illegal in Myanmar, as is hunting. So these 2 practices are illegal. People may lie about those. Also, if social desirability bias is acting, so if they think the interviewer doesn't want them to use bear bile, they may lie about their use. And we used nominative technique and unmatched count technique. I don't have the time to go in depth into either of those techniques, but if you want to know more, please reach out. I've written on this and published articles, and so have others. That can be great resources for using this work in your own studies. So basic demographics, pretty much split. Median age of 39, obviously skewing higher because we only interviewed over 18s. Most individuals were the Rakhine ethnicity, so there are about well over 50 actually ethnicities in Myanmar. So most people in our sample were Rakhine and Buddhist, and they had completed some form of education, generally secondary school. Most individuals were medicinally pluralistic. They used both Western medicine and traditional medicine. And this is important for us to know because theoretically, people who use traditional medicine more may be more likely to use wildlife as well. And we can see here that people use multiple medicinal systems, and generally they're using Western medicine and traditional Myanmar medicine when they're using medicinal products. So both very popular to use. Western medicine was used more in the past 12 months compared to traditional Myanmar medicine, but still people certainly rely on and value traditional Myanmar medicine. However, use of bear bile was extremely low in the sample, even when we measured it with the SQTs to overcome bias. So this is what we got. We got 3.2% for nominative technique, negative 23% prevalence of bear bile use for unmatched count technique, and 0.6 for direct questioning. UCT likely did not work well here because the behavior was already at such a low prevalence. We find UCT doesn't really work in those circumstances. And some deceit seems to be occurring as evidenced by the disparity in nominative technique and direct questioning. However, the behavior is still very low. It's certainly nothing to worry about as conservation practitioners. And this was supported by the qualitative results, which showed that individuals did not use bear bile, nor did they know what it was used for. And the individuals we interviewed were using tons of other animals like python, tiger, elephant, serow, but bear they just simply weren't using. So there wasn't a barrier to using wildlife. Wildlife were being used as medicine. It was simply that bears were not being used as medicine. And this is supported by these belief statements, which show a strong disagreement that using bear bile is part of Rakhine culture, a strong disagreement that's easy to find places to even buy it, edging into disagreement that it has any medicinal value, and pretty 50-50 about medicinal alternatives, probably because there simply just wasn't knowledge about bear bile / bear gallbladder. So an important conclusion from these results is that the use of bear medicinal products is substantially low in Rakhine. So bears that are being poached in Rakhine are being consumed either purposefully for sustenance or as bycatch when people are trying to get different animals, and or they're being traded out to middlemen / the Chinese market to the north. We need to figure out what exactly is going on. And this is surprising in light of other findings in Southeast Asia, which have pointed to bear bile's relative ubiquity. So it's possible that there is a lack of true sun bear bile efficacy. So sun bears are very dominant in Rakhine. Asiatic black bears are relatively certainly more scarce compared to sun bears. So possibly people are not using bear bile simply because it is not medicinally effective for any purpose they would use it for. And again, this is supported because traditional medicine is so dominant in Rakhine. Other wildlife are used very widely. So theoretically, there should be a little barrier to using sun bear bile as well. And another possibility that may be the correct one, or they may work in tandem with each other, is that Rakhine has had less historic contact with the Chinese, who may have had a greater influence on medicinal practices elsewhere in Asia. The Chinese mercantilism, of course, and dominance throughout the Southeast Asian region is much more pronounced in Cambodia, Laos, and Vietnam compared to Myanmar. So it'd be helpful to understand the use of bear bile in Thailand, Indonesia, or other sun bear dominated countries, just to assess sun bear bile efficacy, or to get an understanding of demand for bear products in these areas where sun bears are most prevalent. And it would be really useful to investigate endemic use in northern Myanmar, because this area has had greater contact with China and also likely has more Asiatic black bears. And we know there is this trade in bear gallbladder that may facilitate endemic demand as well in using it. So this finding of low bear bile prevalence shows that reducing the poaching of sun bears in Rakhine will best be achieved through disrupting the trade network in Myanmar, since we do know that is going on, possibly through alternative livelihood development. And I say possibly, but I think certainly, of course, that would be a great strategy just to generally stop hunting and snaring. And I know Instituto Oikos was working quite hard on that and giving better livelihoods prior to, I think, COVID-19. We would like to thank the respondents who gave their time and thoughts, our incredible survey team, and the government in Myanmar for supporting this work. And thank you all for listening to this presentation.
Well, I think with this, we have time to move on to our question and answer session. And I would request all the speakers to turn on their video and turn on your audio when it's your turn to answer the question. So, and I will also request Rajan to moderate the question and answer session. I can look at the screen here.
Yeah, okay, so we have some couple of questions.
So we'll start with our first question. That is for Svitlana. The question is from Trishna Datta, and the question is that, is there any data on brown bear conflict before the development of roads in Siberia? It would help in parsing out the impact of roads.
Depending what type of roads she meant. If it's the paved roads, the earliest record that we had, not for this particular study and this particular presentation, as it was stated that it starts from 2001, but for our previous manuscript was 1932, which was still too late, kind of, because some roads were already present there. And of course, I totally agree that it would be nice, but such cases were found in literature, yet without details. And we didn't have access to police records where they probably, in the region, which means in Siberia or Asian Russia, where they might have recorded the cause of death or injury from brown bears. Otherwise, it would be nice, but I don't even think it might be possible unless you have some, I don't know, satellite data, but that's something, but again, it will be available for recent decades as they started to produce reliable images, satellite images since late 80s, I guess. And for Russia, particularly, it's even later, I guess, 90s. Then you have to analyze each year, certain area. That might be a solution, but again, it's only for the last, for recent decades, relatively recent decades, but not before the Second World War, even before.
Thank you. So I have, before we jump to the other question, I have a question for Professor Shinsuke Koike. It was very interesting talk, Professor Koike, and I was just wondering about any information on females with cubs. So if you have any data on females with cubs, because intuitively you would assume that their energetic requirement is probably higher than either sexes, females without cubs and males. Any information on that?
Yeah, it's a good question. So as you say, so female and calves needs more energy. So in this study, we exclude the mother with calves because we have no data of how to use the energy to grow the calf for mother. So, okay.
So you meant that there's no information. You don't have any collared bears with cubs.
Yes. So we don't use the data of mother bears.
Okay, okay.
Yeah.
Thanks for your answer. So let's move on to other question. And this is for Arzoo. It's from Trishna Datta. Did you analyze seasonal diets of sloth bears? Sloth bears can supplement their water needs with fleshy fruits and could explain some of the survey results.
Yeah, actually, we were doing that seasonal analysis and we actually have data on that too. But I needed to do it further to analyze how much moisture content they are getting from those fruits seasonally available. So I am supposed to do that further to just to form the link between how much moisture content they actually require, especially during summer season.
Mhm. And I have a linked question to that, Arzu. So, sloth bears can sense the presence of water. I won't say very deep, but subterranean water. And there are signs where they can actually dig in these dry riverbeds to find water. Whereas in geospatial technology, by remote sensing or by some other means, you can find out surface water, but not the water that is subterranean.
Yeah.
So, do you think um, that subterranean water and the sloth bear's capability to sense and dig these water holes will change your results or your perception about their requirement for water?
Yeah, I think in my area, I haven't encountered such thing where they have, looking for subterranean water. But in other areas, it might affect my results. Yes, absolutely it will. But that will change depending on the habitat we are talking about. But in my area, I think the kind of terrain it was all about surface water that was available inside the sanctuary area. So I was majorly focusing on that. But yes, as you said, if the habitat changes and the area changes, it might affect the results I've talked about.
Interesting. Thanks. So the next question is for Svitlana. Is there any population estimation of brown bears in your part of the world? And the question is from Ali Amir.
Well, that's something we got into some trouble we used the Russian estimates as we consider them the most adequate compared to other estimates, and another option was to use the IUCN estimates, and they are definitely not available for each year between 2001 and 2018. So we used the Russian estimates, and we describe in details how those numbers were estimated in Russia and are estimated in our manuscript. So that's, I guess, that's the only option that we could access. Unfortunately, it would be definitely a nice idea to actually go there and talk to at least to different hunting managers and scientists in each of the administrative units, yet I guess one needs not only finance, funding for that.
Yeah, exactly.
Something else in addition.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, most of the researchers who are from Asia would agree to that thing that funding to support our research and make it sustainable is a big issue. And I hope that the world community, the bear community, is hearing this plea. So
it's not only funding; it's just some technical issues, and you have to be a very, very good diplomat and know the region and local peculiarities quite well, I suppose. So in addition to funding, it's just there are more difficulties and a lot of things hidden under the surface.
Definitely. I mean, I couldn't agree more, because when you're dealing with different cultures and different government hierarchies, you need to be very diplomatic. And I'm sure that most of us here, including the participants and audience, would have their own share of this diplomacy and how they dealt with these different hierarchies while conducting their research successfully in Asia. I wish we had another session about talking about conservation diplomacy in Asia, maybe for next IBA. So the next question is for Kahoko. and I'll read it for you, Kahoko. This question is from Trishna Datta. Did you notice any difference between males and females or females with cubs while doing your research and answering your research questions?
Thank you for the question. As other questions, our data have the variation in the sex and reproductive status in female bears, but we cannot include those factors in other explanatory variables in our models. There is two reasons. First is our focusing point. In this study, we would like to focus on the estimation of general response of bear species as a whole to temperature change rather than the difference in sex and or reproductive status. And second one is we have the small sample size. Indeed, we divide the data to small parts for daytime and season. So it is difficult to verify the difference by the divide the data more smaller. So, but it is very important to consider the effect of the sex or reproductive status. So in the future or from now on, we will collect more location data of bears and try to analyze the difference of sex or reproductive status.
Interesting. And I have a linked question to that. So how can the managers, forest managers or protected area managers in Japan can use these results for management and conservation of bears?
I think that we can get more details knowledge of how bears will change movement and behavior as a change of temperature. So from this, our results, we can predict how the response pattern changes as a climate change is going on, and we can evaluate whether the bear will adapt to the climate change. And from prediction, we may be able to protect the areas that bears refuge from the heat stress, and the local people to avoid the areas for reducing conflict from between human and bears.
Thank you. Thanks for your answer.
Thank you.
Do we have Amira here? And if she can answer the question.
I think she's not yet here.
Okay.
Yeah. Maybe she'll join after
I
some
saw
time.
that she unmuted herself. Anyway, we'll take her questions later. So let's move on to, we have questions for Jamshid also, but we know that he won't be able to answer those questions because he is not here, and we don't have Elizabeth either. So we'll park their questions for now. We hope that Elizabeth joins the session later on. But meanwhile, we have another question for Svitlana. We'll come back to you, Svitlana. This question is from Andrea Corradini, and Andrea is thanking you for your presentation. Very interesting. The question is that, does the production of Siberian pine fluctuate year to year? Are there signs that logging or disease are affecting the pine stands? One last question: can you hear bear spray in Russia? Can you use bear spray in Russia? So 3 questions.
Okay, the first one, yes, Siberian pine has masting years as beech and European pine, which grows in the Alps, and in some there are some small stands in the Carpathians as well, and that pine also produce edible seeds. So yes, it does fluctuate, and if I'm not mistaken, once in 3 years there is a decent crop from Siberian pines, and then it may not be very good during the following 2 years. And it has been claimed, at least in Russian literature, that those years when Siberian seeds are not that abundant, human bear attacks increase, but it has to be tested. And we tried to dig for data on the Siberian pine abundance, annual Siberian pine abundance, yet we found only for very few years, and for specific regions, which means that we have to either delineate smaller study area in order to evaluate how Siberian pine fluctuation may affect the bear behavior. And of course, it would be wonderful to put some GPS collars on bears living in within the Siberian pine range. Or I think it would be very nice to select a certain region or a certain small area within an administrative unit where Siberian pine grows, and where those stands are still relatively healthy and where bear presence has been detected, and then conduct a very specific and small scale study. Then perhaps to switch to several sites with Siberian pine stands, then do a comparative study, something like that. But of course, funding is an issue. And getting there is probably another issue, physically, even physically. Because Siberian pine grows in quite remote areas, and well, of course, with the roads, it's easier. And we didn't include the unpaved roads, which would be really nice to obtain the data on, but we had only for a few last years for the unpaved road density. Okay, the second one was about the second question.
I'll read it for you. So are there any signs that logging and or disease are affecting the pine stands?
There has been claims in some articles that I found that Siberian pine stands are decreasing, yet it has to be investigated, and probably with the remote sensing, I don't know, it might be a very good idea if Siberian pines different on those remote sensing images as compared to other coniferous species. So it has been claimed, and it's very popular it's rather popular to use Siberian pine timber. It's very expensive. It's kind of a luxurious commodity. It's very good. It smells very nicely. Also, people collect, as I mentioned in my presentation, a lot of pine cones. And I also read that even bears may sometimes destroy Siberian pines because they are waiting for Siberian pine seeds to ripen, and they can't get the cones. So they climb the trees and then they break the branches. And for the long living trees like Siberian pine, well, it's not very good sometimes. But of course, I think the bears can never manage to destroy that much Siberian pine that much as compared to humans. And there was the third one about
it was about, can you use bear spray in Asia?
Well, I haven't read that it's forbidden like in some European states. But surprisingly, I've never read about usage of the bear spray during all those attacks I found the information about, which is quite astonishing if you take into consideration the number of attacks, and that the bear spray has never been reported to be used during the attack or before it. I guess it might have link to this mistrust in bear spray success. That's something I encountered while working in Ukraine. Say, I am at the moment conducting bear field work, and my Polish colleagues and with whom I collaborate, they said it would be a must to buy the bear spray and you have to carry it. So we brought the bear spray, and when I talked to local scientists, they just laughed about bear spray. They said, "Well, it wouldn't work. It's like using some, I don't know, perfume when you have a train coming towards you. So it won't affect. The bear will become angrier. It will never work." So that's something I faced here, that everyone who looks at our bear spray says, I mean, every local scientist with whom I communicated or hunting managers, they're quite skeptical towards the effectiveness, the efficacy of the bear spray, which has been proved to be quite high, as we all know, and Tom Smith's studies have proved that. So I think it would be really interesting to conduct some surveys on people's attitudes towards bear spray. I think it would be really nice in Russia.
Interesting.
That people don't like it, just they've never used it. They read some rumors and they think it won't work, but the weapons will. That's how it is. That's how it might be in Russia as well, because that's something I faced in Ukraine. Then it might be the same in Russia.
Yeah, no, it's very interesting and pertinent point that you brought up. There was a talk by Tom Smith earlier, previous session last week, where he had presented all of these interesting experiments and results of those experiments, specifically one about downward and upward wind and these three-dimensional model in the airflow chamber, which was really interesting. And I think he was trying to convince people to use bear spray. But as you said, in Asia, people don't use bear spray when they go to field. At least I can vouch for India. We don't use bear spray in any of these regions, not for sloth bears, nothing for black bears or Himalayan brown bears. Since we are talking about bear spray, I was just intrigued to know from Japan, when you go for your field work in Japan, do you carry bear spray, or if not, what do you use what do you do when you encounter the bear?
So in Japan, we use bear spray every time when we go to the bear field. So it is a common bear goods. So it is.
Is it effective? Have you ever encountered a bear and used the bear spray and found it effective, or anyone else from your group?
Yeah. So when we encounter the bear, almost we use the bear spray for bear. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Good to hear that. So here, Svitlana, I mean, a survey is required because we want to know whether people use bear spray or not, or whether it's effective or not. And since we are talking about bear spray, let's spend a couple of minutes about bear spray efficacy in other, whether people use bear spray and its efficacy. So Rajan, I know that you have worked on sloth bears in Nepal, in Tarai region, where you also have tigers and rhinos and elephants. But
yes,
what did you do when you encountered bears? Let's hear from you.
I think in Nepal also mostly people do not use bear sprays, and mostly with sloth bears, I think the efficacy, it would be interesting to test the efficacy across species, because for sloth bears, most of the attacks are, sudden attacks, like in the forest, or the habitat is quite different. So maybe it would be interesting to see if it would be effective. If it is, then it would be really helpful for, to lower the conflicts if it works. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was a few years ago, I was working in Bangladesh in Sundarban. I was there for a couple of years, and tigers in Bangladesh Sundarban are infamous for picking up people and taking them away. So many people get killed and picked up by tigers every year. So in my research team, they were going there to place camera traps and collect other data. Our partners and many partners from Western world, they suggested that we should carry bear spray, which would probably be effective for tigers. We tried to procure that. That's another story about bureaucracy in South Asia, Southeast Asia. We couldn't get bear spray across the border. But we were also told that you can use these flashes. So the marine flashes that you break, and then it creates a flare sort of thing. And it was effective in Russia. One of the scientists, tiger biologists, told us that it was very effective in Russia when he had an encounter with a tiger. But again, we could not use flares in Sundarban either. So eventually our field teams went there just with the sticks and
Bamboo sticks.
with the hope that they won't get picked up or attacked by tigers. So Arzoo, anything from your side, bear spray or?
Yeah, actually, we talked about it when we were in a conference in US, and they showed us how to use a bear spray. Then again, as you told everyone, the bureaucracy of bringing in all these stuff and using it is another issue that we are dealing with. But I think I would like to see how it can be used for slaughter, because it is a necessity these days. The conflict issue that we are facing with localites, to promote coexistence and to just create this kind of localites should be aware of or using all these things, and I think it should be permitted to use in our country too. So yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we need more effective ways because we see
Yes.
a lot of people mauled by bears, sloth bears, and famous for
Yeah.
mauling people. Amira, can you hear us? So what do you think about bear spray, since we are talking about that? And then we'll come to your question. Sorry, Amira, we can't hear you. We can't hear you. Can you please speak up? No, sorry, we can't hear you. Anyway, we'll come back to you. We have some other questions. We have a question for Elizabeth also. We have two questions for Amira, and she will. Amira, please try and check if you can, if there's some, I think there's some problem with your mic. We'll come back to Svitlana, and I have a couple of questions, Svitlana. One of them is about human perception. So we can clearly see that the incident rates are going up, the human-bear conflict incidents. Has it affected the human perception about bears in Russia, in those parts where they have these incidents?
I guess it's quite difficult to answer without further investigation of the mood in the articles published and interviews. From those articles that I read about their maulings, I haven't, sometimes I did encounter claims that people had to hunt bears in higher numbers, and particularly in Siberia. At the same time, because bear is a hunted species almost in all Russia, except for few administrative units in European Russia, where it's red listed due to very low numbers. I think, surprisingly, A lot of people are more tolerant towards bear presence and coexisting with them, as even in European Russia, where bears have returned to former to habitats where they were formerly hunted down. Well, one should just sit and investigate sort of measure the temperature of the conflict, human-bear conflict, and that's something out of the scope of our study, because we focused more. We have tried to act a bit like criminologists.
Mhm.
So we paid attention to all possible details of the encounters and what were probable reasons why bears attacked, where they did so, and to environmental variables which could have had a relation. And that's something we also proved, at least for roads and Siberian pine presence. But, well, of course, it would be interesting for someone, perhaps a master's project or a bachelor thesis.
Yeah, no, I think human perception is really important when we're trying to conserve these large carnivores, and it's particularly more important in places like India, Nepal, Bangladesh, where we have lots of people and a lot of chances or probability of bear-human encounter. Despite that, we believe that we have good population of bears of all species in South Asia. So let's move on to other question. I'm just checking the list of questions if we have missed any. So we have two questions for Amira. If can you speak again, Amira, if we can hear you? I think sorry, can't hear you. Can you unmute yourself, Amira?
Hello, am I audible?
Yes, yes, perfect. So I'll speak. I'll let you know these two questions that I have for you. So the first question is from Trishna Datta, and she's asking, a previous speaker in last week mentioned that brown bears in Himalaya are also impacted by medicinal plant collection in high altitude pastures. Did you find any similar incidents or pattern in your study site? So it's mainly about medicinal plant collection in your study area. Is it happening? Sorry, we can't hear you.
Actually, our results suggest that Himalayan brown bear is actually avoiding human disturbance, but we haven't categorized which type of disturbance is exactly brown bears avoiding. It's yet to be categorized.
Okay.
We found that they are avoiding human disturbance, but we haven't categorized it yet. Which are the types of disturbances they are exactly avoiding?
Okay, but do villagers collect medicinal plant in your study site?
No.
They don't?
Sorry, we haven't categorized yet. What
Okay.
exactly are the disturbances they are avoiding? Like it's medicinal plants or firewood extraction, or what are those types they are actually avoiding? We found that they are avoiding human disturbances, but we haven't categorized that. What are those types?
Okay. And the other question for you is from Alia Mir. And the question is that which crop is most affected in brown bear raiding? And is there any process used there to estimate the percentage of crop destroyed in raiding? And the last question from... Yeah, go ahead, please.
Yeah. We found that they are they are raiding the iceberg, apple orchards mostly. We haven't quantified. We quantified that how much percentage they are actually raiding those crops, but that is on another paper, and it will be presented by one of another researchers, one of my another colleague. It will be presented tomorrow by him.
Okay. And is there any compensation
it's his
for the
part?
Sorry, go ahead.
Hello.
Yeah. So the follow-up
Hello.
question is that is. Can you hear me, Amira?
Hello.
I think we
Hello.
lost her. Hello.
No. I'm Harry. Hello.
Okay, I will come back to you again. Okay.
Hello.
Um, Amira, we'll come back to you. So let's check. Rajan, can you please check if we have any other unanswered question?
I think we have answered most of them, but for Jasmeer, if he's not here, so there are a couple of questions for him.
There's one question for Elizabeth also, and she was supposed to join, but she hasn't joined apparently. But anyway, I mean, in Elizabeth's talk also, I was really interested to know, because at one section of her talk, she talked about measuring the distance of her sample area in hours. So she said, I don't know whether you noticed or not, the speakers or audience noticed this or not, but 2 hours of radius from the village, and then they sampled the area. I was, in Asia, people often measure the distance by hours or time. And if you ask somebody, they would just say that, oh, how far is that village? They would say, oh, 10 minutes. So anyway, if Elizabeth was here, we would have discussed that further.
Yes, I think that her talk was also very interesting, a different angle. The method, maybe it would be interesting to know about her methods.
Exactly.
How she avoid the bias that people try to show in interviewing. So I think it would be very interesting if she was there.
Yeah. There was one result specifically which was in negative 23%. And again, I wish she was here to answer that question. But anyway, I would also request the speakers, if you have any questions for each other before we close the session. So any question that you have for others? Nope. I have one last question from my side for Arzoo. So Arzoo, India, it's getting increasingly arid. And we are losing water, not only groundwater, but surface water also. Sloth bears occupy dry forest. With increasing aridity, do you see any, what do you project? What do you see? And I'm looking for an answer for entire range of sloth bears, not only for specific area. So increasing aridity, would it increase the chances of human sloth bear conflict?
Yeah, based on the study I have done in North Gujarat, I believe yes, if water scarcity increases, there would be chances of sloth bear moving into the human-dominated areas, because I have spoken to local villagers and they have said that in summers when there's no water inside the forest area, sloth bear comes to the villages and they have water near well and everywhere. So in few papers that I've studied by Harindra Bargali in Uttarakhand also, presence of sloth bears have been identified close to the water bodies. So it actually impacts their movement. So I believe, yes, if this aridity increases and there's scarcity of water, there will be increase in human sloth bear encounters leading to conflicts and injuries to humans and retaliatory killing of sloth bears. So yeah.
Interesting, and we should have proactive measures for that if we have to address the issues of conservation in Asia. Any last minute comments or questions?
Actually, maybe I should ask to Arzoo during this moment.
Sure, Rajan, go ahead.
Yeah. So when I go through the sloth bear conflict literatures, there are some records that the conflicts are maybe high during monsoon, or there are different patterns. And in your study, you found that conflicts were very high in summer season.
Yeah.
So what do you say about this variation between different parts, or compared to your study?
I think in my area, the habitat was degraded too. So there are factors that might affect why bears are coming in contact with humans, and depending on the areas. I can speak about my area because it was, I studied that there was no water inside and food resources were scarce, but enough to provide for them, but water is not available. So I focused on that part. But yes, I've read few papers where in monsoon conflicts were high. That might be because people goes inside forests for collecting fruits and other forest produce. So that might be another factor that might be leading to high conflict cases during monsoon in other areas. Whereas in my area, it was because it was highly degraded habitat, no water available. So sloth bears might be moving into the villages and looking for food resources or water resources. I haven't established a concrete relationship between their activity and sloth bear movement, but yes, I do believe that this is a limiting factor for the movement, and that's why in summer conflict rate is high than compared to other areas.
Yeah, and also, what did you find? Did you look about termites? Maybe if there were, or fruits, if there were more high termites and fruits near water sources, or I mean, away from water sources.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So plant species that are preferred by sloth bear like Gigifus and other Diospora species were present close to the water bodies. But might, yes, I've found even we have data for that, and we'll be doing analysis and publishing it later. So that's part of our study too. But just because I haven't had the full data because of lockdown, I was not allowed to go inside the sanctuary. I was supposed to continue this study further to collect more data to produce statistical results. So I'm lacking that. But yes, I'll be doing it to provide concrete results on the same.
Yeah, that would be interesting to see.
Yes.
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you for your question.
Well, I think it was very interesting session because we had participants talking about different bear species from different parts of Asia. The speakers were located at different geographical locations all across the earth. And we have had issues about connectivity, and Amira is logging in from her field site, from her phone. This morning, I had heard from Kahoko that her laptop broke down, so she logged in through her iPhone and attended the talk. One of our participants was sick due to COVID, could not come for his presentation. And another speaker, I think it's past midnight for her. That's why she could not attend. But this is diversity about bears and bear researchers. So I hope that with all of these difficulties, even with these difficulties, we could discuss some of the major issues of bear conservation in Asia. We are not saying that we have found solution for every problem within this 2-hour session, but we hope that bear researchers in Asia would continue their research despite all of those difficulties and challenges about raising funds and finances and navigating through bureaucracy and hierarchies, academic and bureaucratic hierarchies in Asia would continue to do their research. And we hope that we can have another session, similar sessions, raising concerns about conservation of Asian bears in next IBA. I don't know where that'll be, but I would like to see most of you in the next conference. And thanks for your participation. Thanks for your enthusiasm and your thoughts for bear conservation. Thank you.